Welcome. My name is Bernard Carr, and it's my great pleasure to be hosting this conference on time and mind for the next 2 days. I'm going to start off by making some introductory remarks before getting into the main program. So first of all, I've shown a picture of all our presenters. There are 8 presenters besides myself, and obviously I'll be giving proper introductions as we go through the conference. But I would just like to thank all the speakers for participating. They're all very eminent in this field. They're also friends of mine, which is why I'm particularly grateful that they are contributing. I also want to thank Essentia Foundation, who are hosting this meeting, and Bex, who have been involved in a lot of the practical administration. And I especially want to thank Bernardo Kastrup, who's a friend of mine, who invited me to put this event together, because it's on topics, time and mind, which are very close to my heart. And Bernardo won't be actually speaking, but he's there in the background. Now, the program you will have already seen. I'm just flashing it up briefly. It's spread over 2 days, and the titles of the talks can be seen by going to the website. I want to make a few introductory remarks. What's fascinating to me about time is that it is really an interdisciplinary subject. It involves physics, philosophy, neuroscience, and psychology. And indeed, we've got representatives from all those fields talking. I should say that I'm also going to be talking, we'll have talks on parapsychology. This is a topic which I'm sometimes a bit embarrassed to talk about in front of physicists, because they tend not to believe in the phenomena. But I personally think it's very important in understanding time. And we've got speakers. The number of speakers in each area is indicated in green here. The majority are physicists, but I want to say that there have been many great books on time and physics. I've just illustrated a few there. But the point about these books is that they don't actually talk about mind or consciousness. So the point of this meeting is that we're going to bring together the theme of time in physics and time as it applies in mind or consciousness. And the speakers I've collected are people who are very qualified and have written many books on that topic. Now, time plays a crucial role in linking physics to those different fields. For example, philosophy, there's this book by Time's Arrow by Hugh Price. The link with neuroscience, Dean Bonanno, Your Brain, the Time Machine. The link with psychology, I've referred here to what's called the Galileo Commission Report, which is something advocating a sort of extension of science which accommodates mind beyond the materialist worldview. But another point I want to emphasize in this meeting, which is my personal fascination, is time is associated with self, the nature of self. There are 2 questions: what is now, and why am I me? They're the questions that fascinate me. And for example, I'm interested why I am Bernard and not Bernardo. And I think this is a profound question. Both of these questions reveal the inadequacy of the standard view of reality. And I hope we all talk about these topics during this conference. And some quotes here: time is nature's way of keeping everything from happening at once. Space is nature's way of keeping everything from happening here. Now, as a physicist, this is my favorite diagram, because it's called the cosmic Ouroboros. It's the snake which is swallowing its own tail. And around the body of the snake are the various scales of structure which exist in the universe. So as you go from the top left anti-clockwise to the top right, essentially the scale of structure is increasing by a factor of 10 for every minute. And so at the bottom you've got people. As you go to the right, you've got larger things. You've got mountains, the planets, stars, solar system, galaxies, the whole universe at the top right. As you go to the left, you've got smaller things like ants, amoebas, DNA molecules, atoms, nuclear particles, and then right at the top left you have the the Planck scale, where we don't quite know what happens. And the forces of nature link the micro world on the left to the macro world on the right. You might ask, why does the snake swallow its own tail? That's because when in astronomy, if you look at something a million light years away, you're looking at it as it was a million years in the past. We think the universe began with a Big Bang 14 billion years ago. So when you look to 14 billion light years, you're actually looking at the universe when it was very small. So the fact that the head of the snake swallows the tail actually is essentially what happens at the Big Bang. Now, to me, this diagram encapsulates the triumph of physics in coming to understand the physical world. But there's something missing in this diagram, and that's any reference to mind. So it's, if you like, the triumph of mindlessness. And nowadays there's quite a lot of emphasis on mindfulness. But there are reasons for believing that mind is a fundamental, not an incidental feature of the universe. So it seems to me that one should be putting this I, if you like, as symbolic of mind, in the middle of this diagram. And the question is, the theory of everything, which physicists are looking for, is the theory of everything actually going to relate to mind? Is it going to have any reference to consciousness at all? Now, most physicists would say no. For example, my supervisor and friend, Professor Stephen Hawking, I worked with him as a student. This is a picture at Caltech in 1975. I'm sure many of you have seen the film The Theory of Everything, which was, in a sense, about Stephen's attempt to find the theory of everything. But in fact, what the story was about, it was about his love affair with his first wife, Jane. And I always found that rather ironic, because the one thing a theory of everything, as a particle physicist used the term, is not going to talk about is love. I was lucky enough to be invited to the premiere of this movie, and I sat next to Stephen, and I know he enjoyed the movie. And so I always imagine the press the next day, Stephen Hawking finds the theory of everything enjoyable. But there is a serious point to this, that I think there is something missing in the so-called theory of everything. Now, there are hints that mind is fundamental. I don't have, even to physics, I don't have time to go into this in detail. One example is quantum theory. Many people have argued that consciousness may play a role in collapsing the wave function. And what's interesting about quantum theory is that for the first time, the observer actually plays a role in physics. And I like this picture from Escher, which shows the hand drawing itself. Another hint, maybe, is the so-called anthropic principle, which says that there are fine-tunings between the constants of physics, which seem to be necessary for observers to arise in the universe. And one explanation of this is that there's a multiverse where the constants are different. Now, not everybody believes in the multiverse, and even those who are interested in it don't always think it's part of physics. But the point is, I'm advertising my book here, Universe or Multiverse, on the topic. But at least it's a hint that consciousness and mind is important. Another clue comes from parapsychology, which is something I tend not to mention in front of physicists because they don't believe it. But personally, I do think parapsychology is crucial because it shows that consciousness can directly interact with the physical world if you believe in the phenomena. And therefore, if you want your theory of physics to be complete, it has to expand to accommodate consciousness. But perhaps the most important point is that time is the link, because time plays a crucial role in physics, and we understand it pretty well in physics, but it also plays a crucial role in understanding consciousness and mind, the passage of time. And that's really what we're going to be focusing on in this meeting. So if we go back to this Ouroboros, the point is that you've got quantum theory on the left, describing the microscopic domain, relativity theory on the right, describing the macroscopic domain. We want this final theory. And the question is, will that marriage of quantum and relativity theory accommodate mind? I like to think it will. By no means all physicists will agree with me. If that's true, in some sense, that new paradigm, whenever it comes, will represent the end of the matter-centric view. And I'm even going to argue, my own personal view, that this might have something to do with higher dimensions, as come in some models of particle physics. Not everyone believes this, but at least we have some supporters. Sir Roger Penrose, of course, who got the Nobel Prize. My position on consciousness demands a major revolution in physics. There is something very fundamental missing from current science. Our understanding at this time is not adequate, and we're going to have to move to new regions of science. So I think that really the completion of the Eurobas represents a triumph for physics. That's why I emphasize it, but it also poses a dilemma. And because this is an image from a paper by George Ellis, our next speaker, and Joe Silk, when you look at the very top of the cosmic Ouroboros, M theory and the multiverse, the question is it really physics or is it philosophy? Because we don't have observational evidence for these things. Well, we're talking about both physics and philosophy in this meeting, so we're going to be addressing both those fields in some sense, but it's important to bear in mind, because the question is, if there is going to be a new extension of physics or science which accommodates mind, are we going to call it science or is it philosophy? And that's where I'm going to end my formal introduction. Welcome to the second day of the Time and Mind conference. I am Bernard Carr, and I will be hosting the meeting again. I will start off by giving a 10-minute introduction. I started off yesterday by stressing that time is an interdisciplinary subject which involves physics, philosophy, neuroscience, and psychology, and indeed parapsychology. And that's really what makes it so interesting, because we brought together people who have expertise in all these different fields. Now, I shouldn't give the impression that those are the only 4 areas which have relevance to time. I'm also quite interested in the insights into time that come from literature. We're not going to talk about that in this meeting, but I'd just like to highlight a wonderful article by Etzel Cardenia on time and writers. And he talks about a variety of concepts: sequential time, disjointed time, suspended time, anticipated time, circular time, reverse time, alternate time, eternal time, end of time. I'm not going to explain what all those different terms mean. I just want to indicate that literature can also give great insights into the topic, because all of those concepts arise in literature. He gave his talk, incidentally, in a wonderful meeting on the mystery of time, which was hosted by the Ball Foundation just over a year ago. And actually, that meeting was important because that's where I met 2 of today's speakers, Mark and Julia. Now, I want to also emphasize that there are other topics which we are not covering in this conference, because we only have 2 days, but I just thought it might be useful to highlight these so you can investigate them further on your own if it's of interest. First of all, there's a whole link between neurophysics and consciousness. There was a meeting on neuroscience needs a revolution to understand consciousness. That was just last August, and all those talks are recorded. In particular, we heard a lot about the ideas of Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff that quantum processes in the brain may relate to consciousness. There's also a lot of interest within the field in what is called integrated information theory, which is one model of consciousness, but another model is the global neuronal workspace theory. And Christoph Koch and Giulio Tononi are the people associated with those theories. And we're not going to be focusing on this. Possibly Alex, one of our speakers, will mention this, but it's worth stressing, though, because it is an important development if we're thinking about consciousness. In fact, this project, there was a project funded by the Templeton Foundation, $20 million project, which was basically funding a comparison of these 2 theories by scanning the brains of participants during cleverly designed tests. Again, I'm not going to go into any details, but I think it's important to know about that. And also there's the whole link with information theory and consciousness. And I want to highlight the work of Federico Fagin. on the hard problem and free will. Again, we're not talking about that today, but it's areas that people in the audience can explore on their own if they so wish. Now, a lot of the discussion today is going to be on consciousness. Remember, the theme of the meeting is time and mind, so there's quite an emphasis on mind today. And it's worth saying that there are three views of consciousness among the scientific community. And when I say consciousness, of course, we heard yesterday how consciousness is very much related to mental time. So this is also, if you like, three views of time. The first view is that, in fact, consciousness is in some sense just an illusion generated by the brain. I think we heard about Daniel Dennett's philosophy, where the consciousness is we're zombies. The second view is that it's real, but it simply isn't part of physics or science itself, physics being a small part of science, if you like. So, in other words, physicists should not attempt to expand physics to accommodate it. But there is a third view, and that is that in some sense physics can be extended so that it does accommodate consciousness. And I have to say, as you may have gathered yesterday, that's my own view, but it's probably not the majority view among physicists. And in particular, I want to highlight, I think I showed this slide yesterday, this is the Galileo Commission report, which is advocating a sort of post-materialist science, where you're using the approach of science, but you're going beyond the normal material world. You're considering the mental domain as well. I shouldn't be plugging my own approach, but I myself yesterday talked about how you might do that. We know we amalgamate space and time into space-time with relativity theory. We amalgamate matter and mind through observation, which relates to quantum theory. So the question is whether you can have some unification of matter, mind, and space and time, which would bring everything together. And that's my own personal dream and the dream of many other people. But of course, it's important to realize that if you're going to do that, it will certainly involve an extended notion of space and time. In fact, myself and also Jonathan spoke about that explicitly yesterday. Now, I'd like to say a bit about consciousness, because the question is consciousness fundamental? Some people think it is. David Chalmers, I propose that conscious experience be considered a fundamental feature irreducible to anything more basic. Is it relevant to physics? It may not be relevant to physics if it's fundamental, but some physicists think it is. It's not possible to formulate the laws of physics in a fully consistent way without reference to the consciousness of the observer, Eugene Wigner. Is consciousness produced by the brain? 99% of neuroscientists obviously think it is, but here's Stuart Kaufman, a biologist. Nobody has the faintest idea what consciousness is. I don't have any idea, nor does anybody else, including the philosophers of mind. Well, I want to stress a possibility which may not be mainstream, but we have heard references to it. Is there such a thing as consciousness with a big C, which is different from consciousness with a little c? The evidence for this comes from various phenomena, which we don't have time to go through, but these are some nice quotes. Emerson, there is one mind common to all individual men, a universal mind. David Bohm, physicist, deep down the consciousness of mankind is one. This is a virtual certainty, and if we don't see this, it's because we are binding ourselves to it. There's a nice book actually by Larry Dossey, which sort of summarizes all the arguments. But if that's the case, if there is one mind, we have the question, well, what's the point of the brain? And in this view, the brain is a filter of consciousness rather than a producer of consciousness. So here's a quote from Aldous Huxley. Each one of us is potentially mind at large, but insofar as we are animals, our business at all costs is to survive. To make biological survival possible, mind at large has to be funneled through the reducing valve of the brain and nervous system. Now, this, of course, is at odds with the mainstream view, which is that the brain produces consciousness. But I think there is some evidence that, in some sense, the brain is a filter. People have near-death experiences where their brains are flatlined, but they're still very conscious and even experiencing more vivid reality, psychedelic experiences, savant syndrome, terminal lucidity, where people who've suffered from Alzheimer's suddenly become lucid before they die. So this is controversial, but it's very important. But that's the question: does the brain produce or filter consciousness? And I want to focus on that question. I think it will arise today. And this is a picture I sometimes show, the pyramid of complexity, showing how complexity builds up from the Big Bang 14 billion years ago. Quarks, nucleons, atoms, biomolecules, cells, organisms eventually produce brains, which produce consciousness. That, if you like, is the culmination of complexity. And that's the standard view. But there is another view which says that underlying everything there is consciousness with a big C, the one I. And in that case, that's when you have to invoke the filter theory, saying that consciousness actually is the consciousness we experience is just a fragment of that bigger consciousness. And I think that is where I'm going to end my introduction.